We shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Prime Minister. The government has quoted AEMO to say its renewables-only energy policy would cost $121 billion. Can the Prime Minister confirm that, according to AEMO, this value does not include a single cent of the cost for any projects that are commissioned, committed or anticipated, including Snowy Hydro 2.0, the Central West Orana Transmission Link or the Copper String Transmission Project?
Order. Members on my right. I'm going to ask the member for Fairfax to state that question again, because the Minister for Climate Change and Energy was constantly interjecting. The question is not directed to him. Order. I want to hear from the member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Prime Minister. The government has quoted AEMO to say its renewables-only energy policy would cost $121 billion. Can the Prime Minister confirm that, according to AEMO, this value does not include a single cent of the cost for any projects that are commissioned, committed or anticipated, including Snowy Hydro 2.0, the Central West Orana Transmission Link or the Copper String Transmission Project?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. AEMO produces an integrated systems plan, and they produce it every year. And indeed, here it is. Here it is. See this? This is called detail. And they have it on this side.
Order.
On this side there's graphs, there's details, there's costs, and on that side there's yours.
Order. The Prime Minister will not use graphs.
So on one side is us, on the other side is yours. And on one side of all of ours, well, the first thing we did was read it in the lead-up to the election campaign, when we said what the basis of our plan was the integrated systems plan. And what's extraordinary is that the entire time that they were in office,
the Leader of the Nationals,
they ignored the integrated systems plan that was brought down by the Australian Energy Market Operator. They had 22 different policies and didn't land a single one. A single one. Nothing. What we have done is move forward in a practical way. The Shadow Minister just used that, the member for Deakin. I'd concentrate on door knocking if I were you, mate. The fact is...
Order.
Not because it would help you, by the way.
Order.
Not because it would help you.
The Prime Minister will return to the question.
The
member for Deakin will cease
interjecting. Here's a plan. What you have is that. A blank page, no costings. You can't say how many gigawatts. You can't say how many reactors will be there. You can't say what you'll do with the 6 of the 7 owners of the land who've said no to it. At least people like the member for Wannon have been smart enough to say, we don't want it anywhere near me.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Order. Members on my left, we're going to have the House come to order so I can hear from the member for Dunkley.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government helping families and business with the cost of energy bills, and what policies has the government rejected and why?
The call to the Minister. Order. The member for Deakin is now warned. Do not interject before a minister speaks. Order. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for her question and her contribution in this House since her recent arrival. And, Mr Speaker, in 6 days' time, energy bill relief flows to the Australian people because of the Albanese government. In 6 days' time, every single Australian with an energy bill will get relief from this government, following the relief in last year's budget. And, of course, Mr Speaker, what's also happening is that energy prices, wholesale energy prices, which were $375 a megawatt hour when we came to office, were $76 a megawatt hour in the first quarter of this year, Mr. Speaker. That's less. $76 a megawatt hour is less than $375 that the previous government presided over. That's because renewable energy is up 25% since we came to office, and because this government put caps on the price of coal and gas. Now, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member also asked me what policies we have rejected. And we reject the thought bubble which says that you can introduce the most expensive form of energy known anywhere in the world to Australia and it will somehow magically see bills go down. And we're not the only people who've rejected it. We saw Rod Sims, the former chair of the ACCC, say yesterday that it would increase energy prices by more than $200 a year. We've seen Rowan McConnell say that it will increase prices by $400 to $500 a year. We've seen Roger Darville say it will increase prices by up to $1,000 a year, Mr. Speaker. Whichever one of those it is, it's more than Australians are paying today, Mr. Speaker. Whoever is right, it's more than Australians are paying today. And it gets worse, because what we know from the opposition's thought bubble is a few things. We don't know the costs, we don't know the modelling, but we know a few things. And we know that this once great party of free enterprise has said they're going to run it all. They're going to own all of them. They're going to run it all. And the Shadow Treasurer a couple of weeks ago said he's against subsidies. It's all got to stand up for itself. And then the Leader of the Opposition said we're going to run it all. But the Shadow Treasurer cleared it up. He said, don't worry, it's off budget. It's off budget. And that means they're going to make money on it. That means they're going to make money on it. So they're going to spend hundreds of billions and they're going to make money, which means they're going to charge more. Now, the Shadow Treasurer has said that off-budget funds are risky, they increase taxes, they increase inflation and they're bad for the economy, and he calls them sneaky. He's going to repeal $10 billion in off-budget for housing. They're opposed to $20 billion in off-budget for transmission, but they're fine with $600 million off-budget for nuclear energy. That's just fine. Apparently that's not going to increase taxes, that's not going to increase interest rates, and that's not risky for Australians, Mr. Speaker. This half-baked yellow cake idea, Mr. Speaker, of the opposition falls apart every time it gets exposed to any scrutiny at all. It just underlines the fact that this Leader of the Opposition is a huge risk to Australia's economic future.
Give the call to the member for Fairfax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question goes to the Prime Minister. The government has quoted AEMO to say its renewables-only energy policy would cost $121 billion. Can the Prime Minister confirm that, according to AEMO, this value does not include a single cent of the cost for the required upgrades to Australia's distribution network?
Order. Order. Before I call the minister, I'd like to hear from the member for Wentworth, who has risen on her feet, and she will be heard in silence as well.
Thank you. Speaker, I'm seeking direction from the chair regarding Standing Order 100DI. The Standing Order states that questions must not contain statements of facts unless they can be authenticated. I note that the Shadow Minister has asked for clarification about the renewables-only plan of the government. I'd like to understand if that is indeed a renewables-only plan of the government.
Well, the difficulty the chair has is I cannot be responsible for every single statement that is made in the House. I can give the member the benefit of the doubt and would hope that no member would ever be misleading the House, and I know the member for Fairfax would be definitely in that category. So it's difficult for the chair to make a ruling, and the precedent has been for a very long period of time that the question asked by the member is in line with practice. But I'll hear from the Leader of the House on the point of order.
Just on this standing order, Mr. Speaker, there have been occasions where members have been asked to authenticate with evidence. So whether that's something that's appropriate for this question or not, I'm just saying there is some precedent for that being sought.
Order. I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition and then return to the member for Wentworth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, on the point of order as just raised by the Leader of the House, I mean, there's no reference to precedent whatsoever. Some vague recollection of something that might have happened just around the time of Federation, but no detail, no page of practice. Nothing at all. So I wouldn't take that red herring, Mr. Speaker. The fact is that this government, the wheels are falling off this government as the Australian.
Order. The House is going to come to order so we can deal with this issue, so question time may continue. On the same point of order, the member for Warringah.
Just in furtherance to the member for Wentworth seeking a clarification from the Speaker, the standing orders are very clear that in relation to those statements of facts, unless they can be authenticated, since this statement of renewables only plan has been repeated on a number of occasions, surely it is not difficult for the Shadow Minister to provide the authentication of that statement.
Look, I can appreciate on the order. Members on my right. No, the Deputy Leader is entitled. Order. No, anyone is entitled to raise on this point of order, and so is the Deputy Leader.
On the point of order, Mr. Speaker, the statement made was a fact.
Order. Members on my right, I want to deal with this matter quickly so we can move on. This is dealing with members' question time, and there are members who I know wish to ask questions. Perhaps on a final point of order, the member for Wentworth.
I note in the opposition's budget reply on this speech, I've read the opposition's budget reply on this speech, and which uses the term renewables only on the website of the Leader of the Opposition, but uses those in quotation marks. And so I am seeking clarification about is this a statement of fact in relation to renewables only, or is it not? Because there are concerningly different kind of interpretations in relation to that.
We're going to deal with this matter. So order. Members on my right, so we can move on with question time. I appreciate the concern by members of the crossbench raising this matter. It would be untenable for the Speaker to simply start deciding or ruling in or out what I believe is a statement of fact. I have to rely on the authenticity of all members, including members of the crossbench with their questions, to understand the position that I'm in to enable question time to effectively operate. So we're going to move on. I appreciate the member's statement, but we're going to move on. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
As I recall the question, Mr. Speaker, it was about whether the cost in the $121 billion includes distribution. That was the question asked by the member for Fairfax, and that was a very interesting question because I have heard the Leader of the Opposition confuse transmission and distribution in the past. That's right. And I thought, oh, well, he's the leader, he's got to be across a lot of portfolios, he doesn't have to be across the detail. We've just learned he's been ill-advised by his Shadow Minister, Mr. Speaker, because transmission is about the big interconnectors, the big interstate connections. Distributions is poles and wires and telegraph poles in suburbs, Mr. Speaker. Now, regardless of how the energy is generated, you still need telegraph poles. And you still need wires in the street, Mr. Speaker, unless this is a secret part of the plan we haven't been told about yet, Mr. Speaker. And if it's nuclear, you don't need telegraph poles, Mr. Speaker. That's what the member for Fairfax is putting down. Apparently, they're not going to need to invest at all in poles and wires in the streets. We're not going to need any new telegraph poles in new suburbs, Mr. Speaker. Because it all comes from nuclear all of a sudden. They don't need it in France, apparently. In France, there's no telegraph poles. This is news. This is news.
Order.
I mean, this is the new golden age where we don't need any telegraph poles. We don't need any wires. I mean, the former member for Warringah, Tony Abbott, once said he was going to put them all underground in his electorate, but this is going one better. We don't need them at all. Now, Mr. Speaker,
the Minister. There's far too much noise on my left. I want to hear from the member for Fairfax on his one point of order, and he may have the call.
He's misleading us.
And before the member makes his statement, it needs to be very clear, not adding additional statements in. He has leading the MPI today, so I want to be very clear. He's going to be strict with his point of order. We've had enough interruptions so far. Order. We're going to deal with this in a respectful way. The member for Fairfax has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it is on relevance. The question went to whether or not the AEMO quoted figure of $121 billion included so much as 1 single cent of the cost for the required upgrades to Australia's distribution network.
Order. Order. The member for Fairfax will resume his seat. He's raised his point of order. The Leader of the Opposition will cease interjecting. To assist the House, I'm going to ask the minister to return to the question, because I could not hear what he was saying.
The member for Fairfax underlines his misunderstanding that any investment in distribution is required whether the power comes from renewables or coal or gas or nuclear, Mr Speaker. It's the same. It's the same regardless of where the generation comes from. You still need telegraph poles. You still need wires, Mr Speaker. And the other interesting thing is that the member for Fairfax is now approvingly quoting AEMO, who he and the Leader of the Opposition have been bagging for months for daring to point out that renewables, firm renewables, are the cheapest form of energy, Mr Speaker.
Member for Casey.
AEMO will be releasing an updated ISP tomorrow, and I look forward to the member for Fairfax criticising AEMO when they make similar points tomorrow.
Give the call. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy is now warned. It's the same rules either side. No interruptions when I'm about to call a question, to show the respect to the person asking the question. Member for Moreton has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government working to deliver cost of living relief, to ease pressure on Australians, and what hurdles have been overcome?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Speaker, it's a real honour to represent the southern suburbs of Brisbane with the member for Moreton. I appreciate his friendship, I appreciate his advice, and I appreciate his question as well today, because the member for Moreton understands that Monday is the 1st of July and that makes it a very important day, Mr Speaker, because after Monday,
the Treasurer will pause. The Treasurer will pause. The Treasurer will pause. No. There's too much noise. The member for Barker is now warned. We are 20 seconds in and all I'm getting is a wall of noise on my left. So that's going to stop. We're going to reset. The member for Moreton was heard in silence. The Treasurer is going to be given the same courtesy. Okay? The Treasurer has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. The 1st of July is a very important day because after Monday, every taxpayer will get a tax cut. Every household will get energy bill relief. Millions of workers on awards will get a pay rise. We are delivering cheaper medicines and an extra 2 weeks of paid parental leave. So Monday is a very important day for parents and pensioners, for workers and families, for Middle Australia, for teachers and truckies and nurses. Now, Mr Speaker, those opposite said they'd roll back the tax cuts. They voted against energy bill relief last time. They said no to cheaper medicines. They presided over a decade of low wages growth. This side of the House is proud to be delivering better wages, bigger tax cuts, more energy bill relief, cheaper medicines and more help for parents, Mr Speaker. This is how we ensure that Australians earn more and keep more of what they earn. This is how you deliver cost of living relief, not by pushing up prices with expensive nuclear reactors, which cost more and take longer and create new investor uncertainty and squander the economic opportunity that comes from cheaper and cleaner renewable energy, and not by pretending, as the opposition leader does, that there'll be lower power prices in the 2020s if you build reactors in the late 2030s, Mr Speaker. Now, we know that people are under the pump. We know they're under the pump right now, and we'll see that in the inflation numbers that we get tomorrow. Now, those numbers will show that inflation is much lower than at their peak, and much lower than the 6.1% that we inherited from the coalition. But we also know that inflation doesn't always moderate in a straight line. The monthly numbers can be volatile. They don't compare the same things from one month to the next month.
Order.
And we know
Members
from inflation, which peaked earlier and higher in other countries, that it can zig and zag on the way down, and that last mile can be a bit harder, Mr Speaker. But our policies are reducing inflation, and they're expected to reduce inflation further. That's why the most recent Treasury forecasts have us coming back to the inflation target band earlier than expected. Now, that's because of our responsible economic management, Mr Speaker. It's because we are turning two big Liberal deficits into two substantial Labor surpluses. And it's because of the way that we are rolling out cost of living relief from this Monday, a tax cut for every taxpayer, energy bill relief for every household, a pay rise for people on awards, cheaper medicines and an extra 2 weeks of paid parental leave.
Before I call the member for Kooyong, I just have a couple of acknowledgements. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery is a group of Vice-Chancellor scholars from the University of Wollongong as guests of the member for Cunningham, and also as guests of the member for Gippsland. I'm advised that present in the gallery today is Professor Dix, the President of the International Tunnelling and Underground Space Association. Members may recall that Professor Dix played a vital role in the successful mission to rescuing 41 miners who were trapped underground when a tunnel collapsed in November late last year. While Professor Dix is a world-class disaster expert, I assure members he is here in a social capacity today. Welcome to you all. We give the call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, it's been reported today that Julian Assange has left the United Kingdom and is now en route to a United States territory. There are reports that after 14 years, his legal proceedings may soon be resolved. Prime Minister, is Julian Assange finally coming home?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Kooyong for her question and for her ongoing interest in this issue, along with members on this side of the House, some of the members on the opposite side of the House and the crossbenchers, including the member for Kooyong and the member for Clark in particular, has had a long-term association with this issue. The government is certainly aware that Australian citizen Mr Julian Assange has legal proceedings scheduled in the United States. While this is a welcome development, we recognise that these proceedings are crucial and they're delicate. Given these proceedings are ongoing, it isn't appropriate to provide further detailed comment. I will say, though, that the Australian government has continued to provide consular assistance to Mr Assange through the UK High Commissioner, Stephen Smith, who travelled with Mr Assange when he left the United Kingdom, and US Ambassador Kevin Rudd, who is also providing important assistance. I've been very clear as both the Labor leader in opposition but also as Prime Minister that regardless of the views that people have about Mr Assange's activities, the case has dragged on for too long. There is nothing to be gained by his continued incarceration, and we want him brought home to Australia. And we have engaged and advocated Australia's interests using all appropriate channels to support a positive outcome, and I've done that since very early on in my Prime Ministership. I will have more to say when these legal proceedings have concluded, which I hope will be very soon, and I will report as appropriate at that time.
Give the call to the honourable member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Speaker. My question's to the Minister for Health. How are the Albanese Labor government's Medicare urgent care clinics making it easier for Australians to see a doctor after decades of cuts and neglect?
Give the call to the order. Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I thank my friend the member for Newcastle for that question. She is part of the formidable Hunter Labor team, along with the member for Shortland, the member for Hunter, the member for Patterson. I can tell you, Mr Speaker, they hunt as a pack, relentlessly arguing for better services, for more jobs, for targeted help, with the cost of living in their amazing community, Mr Speaker, and they are terrific advocates for our broader plan for a stronger Medicare. They made the case for the reinstatement of funding to the outstanding after-hours GP services in that region, GP Access, funding that was cut by the Liberals, but I can say as a result of their advocacy, that service is now back up and running at full tilt, Mr Speaker. But they're also fierce supporters of our broader Strengthening Medicare plan. More bulk billing services, a critical issue in Newcastle and the Hunter. More cheaper medicines, that's something they've argued for very, very strongly, and that network of urgent care clinics that the member for Newcastle referred to. The Cessnock Urgent Care Clinic, Mr Speaker, was one of the 58 clinics that we opened as part of our election commitment last year, and the member for Hunter has told us that almost 7,000 members of his community have already been seen at that clinic, the majority of whom would otherwise have had to spend hours waiting at the emergency department at the Cessnock Hospital. Across the network of those 58 urgent care clinics, Mr Speaker, in less than 12 months, already 494,000 patients have been seen, a third of them kids under the age of 15, a third of them on the weekend, and every single one of them fully bulk billed, seen free of charge, not just taking pressure off the local hospitals but delivering real help with the cost of living. But, Mr Speaker, we know we can do more. We know we can do more, and that's why I was back in the region with the Hunter Labor team announcing a second urgent care clinic for the Newcastle and Lake Macquarie region, again to take pressure off the wonderful John Hunter Hospital, part of 29 further additional urgent care clinics that we announced as part of the budget last month, Mr Speaker. I also announced a second clinic in the Gold Coast around Southport, Mr Speaker, to take pressure off the busiest emergency department in the nation in that part of Australia. And last week I announced with the Minister for Climate Change and Energy an urgent care clinic in the Fairfield region to take pressure off the very busy Fairfield Hospital, and there will be more announcements, Mr Speaker, I can guarantee you that. Our focus on making Medicare stronger and healthcare cheaper could not be more different from the focus of those opposite, Mr Speaker. Their record of making healthcare more expensive, that blatant disregard for the cost of healthcare that we again see running right through their plan to push up power prices through nuclear reactors.
Has concluded. Give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. President Biden has declared nuclear power America's biggest source of clean energy. And last week, the US Congress overwhelmingly backed a bill to cut red tape and accelerate the construction of nuclear power plants across the country. Why is the Albanese government risking the lights going out in Australia instead of using nuclear energy, which is proven around the world to deliver cheaper, cleaner and more consistent energy?
Members on my right, I couldn't hear that question. The Deputy Leader will be given the courtesy of asking her question in silence. If I'm going to make decisions about the answers, I have to hear the question. The Deputy Leader has the call.
My question is to the Prime Minister. President Biden has declared nuclear power America's biggest source of clean energy. And last week, the US Congress overwhelmingly backed a bill to cut red tape and accelerate the construction of nuclear power plants across the country. Why is the Albanese government risking the lights going out in Australia instead of using nuclear, which is proven around the world to deliver cheaper, cleaner and more consistent energy?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Deputy Leader of the Opposition for her question. And she asked about international experience as if all nations are the same. Well, here in Australia we have different comparative advantages, and that's why every single analysis has shown.
Order. The Leader of the Opposition, we've had the question. We're going to hear the answer.
Has shown that the cheapest form of new energy here in Australia is renewables. That's why those opposite have had to go when it comes to nuclear and say, forget about our support for private enterprise, forget our support for markets. We're going to have a command economy system. We're going to nationalise the energy system. Why are they saying that? Because not a single bank, not a single financial institution will finance a nuclear reactor in Australia. And that's why the Leader of the Opposition himself said in just last year, he said that he didn't support large-scale nuclear reactors. He was opposed to them. And that's what I assume they all said during their 22 different plans that they handed down when they were in government, without one of them being pro-nuclear. And of course, it was the hero of those opposite, John Howard, who went out there and legislated for a nuclear reactor ban here in Australia under the Howard government. Something I assume the current Leader of the Opposition voted for when it came in. Now, I'm asked about international advantages, and the Leader of the Opposition has enthusiastically promoted US-based company NuScale's small reactors technology. But last November, this poster child of the opposition collapsed because of rising costs, taking with it $600 million of American taxpayers' money. Now, in a speech to the Institute of Public Affairs in July last year, the Leader of the Opposition told his audience, as part of a nuclear renaissance, France will shortly commence testing on a nuclear power plant in Flamanville. Leader of the Opposition forgot to mention that the plant is now more than a decade overdue, with the final cost $22.3 billion, being more than 4 times the original estimate. 4 times. And that's if it actually starts this year. And of course, in November, the Shadow Minister for Energy said on radio that nuclear in the UK is just ramping up further and further. Now, Britain's flagship Hinkley Point C nuclear plant was initially due to be operational in 2017, and now it's going to cost...
Call to the honourable member for Solomon.
My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering a more effective surface combatant fleet for the Royal Australian Navy, and how is this different to other approaches?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister for Defence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for his question and acknowledge his distinguished service. When the Albanese government came to power, we inherited from the Liberals the oldest surface fleet that the Royal Australian Navy had operated since the end of the Second World War. HMAS Anzac was on her last legs, which meant that we had 11 coming down to 10 surface combatants without the prospect of a new surface combatant entering our fleet until 2034. And that was the first of the Hunter-class frigates. And when the Liberals announced the Hunter-class frigate program, they said that steel would start being cut in 2020, but by the time of the last election in 2022, no steel had been cut. The program was running years over time, billions of dollars over budget. With 7 different defence ministers rotating through that chair, the last of which was the Leader of the Opposition. This stands as one of the worst examples of the lost defence decade under the Liberals, of the shambolic way the Liberals managed Australia's national security. Now, in coming to office, we commissioned a review of the surface fleet, and in February of this year we announced a new fleet for our Navy, which would in time see a doubling of our service combatants, but importantly, the first of those new service combatants coming into service this decade, in the 2020s. And unlike those opposite, this was a plan which was fully funded, and that is critical because it gives Navy the predictability to allow us to go out there and build those ships. And, Mr Speaker, last week we took a giant step forward in that regard. On Thursday, we signed contracts for the first 3 of the 6 Hunter-class frigates, which will form a part of the Royal Australian Navy, and on Friday we cut the first piece of steel under that contract, which will form a part of HMAS Hunter. It's a huge moment. HMAS Hunter will be an exquisite capability, the most potent undersea warfare frigate in the world. And this program will employ 2,500 Australians, and in combination with the building of our future submarines and the extending of life of our Collins-class submarines, it will see the Osborne Naval Shipyard become home to 7,000 workers engaged in high-tech manufacturing. And the contrast with the Liberal circus could not be more stark, because the Liberals were a defence disaster, and the Albanese government is doing everything it takes to keep Australians safe.
Before I call the member for Moncrieff, I'm pleased to advise the House that we have the Mayor of Mornington Peninsula Shire, Councillor Simon Brooks, and the CEO from the Committee for Frankston Mornington Peninsula, Mr Joshua Sinclair, as guests of the member for Dunkley. And I'll give the call to the honourable member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. UK Labor is currently campaigning with a manifesto which calls for new nuclear power stations and small modular reactors to make Britain a clean energy superpower. Why is the Albanese Labor government risking the lights going out in Australia instead of using nuclear energy, which is proven around the world to deliver cheaper, cleaner—
Members on my right.
Pleasure.
We'll do this as long as it takes, but if I can't hear the question, same principle as the time before. So to get through the questions, if everyone can cease interjecting, we'll get through more questions. The Minister for Social Services is warned. The member for Moncrieff will begin her question again.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. UK Labor is currently campaigning with a manifesto which calls for new nuclear power stations and small modular reactors to make Britain a clean energy superpower. Why is the Albanese Labor government risking the lights going out in Australia instead of using nuclear energy, which is proven around the world to deliver cheaper, cleaner and more consistent energy?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question, and I'm asked about the British election campaign, and I won't refrain from the obvious. I won't refrain from the obvious because, as Prime Minister, of course, I wish both Rishi Sunak, who I know well, and Keir Starmer well as well in the election that will be held, I think next week, next Thursday, and we'll wait and see what happens there. But when it comes to the UK, do we have to have the gibberish, Mr Speaker?
Order. The Prime Minister will ignore the interjections, and the manager of opposition business will
I'm asked about
assist.
Britain. I noticed there weren't interjections about the sun shining in Britain. I noticed that, because those opposite seem to think that every country is the same. Now, the UK began its nuclear program in the 1940s. They have decades of work
The member for Barker.
on a nuclear industry. And for them, as
The Leader of the Nationals will cease interjecting.
As the International Energy Agency says, a range of countries nuclear will play an important role in. But for Australia, it does not make sense. It does not make economic sense. Now, when it comes to Britain, the Hinkley Point C nuclear plant was initially due to be operational in 2017. It was supposed to cost $35 billion. Now it will open sometime after 2031, more than a decade late, and it will cost about $90 billion. $90 billion for one reactor in the UK. One. And that's why when I'm asked about other jurisdictions, let's talk about some jurisdictions closer to home. New South Wales opposition leader, we can't wait for nuclear. Victorian opposition leader, there are prohibitions in place, so I'm not racing along the nuclear path. Victorian Nats leader, you wouldn't be surprised that our view is exactly the same as John Pizzuto. Queensland LNP leader, I've been very consistent with it. Nuclear is not part of planning in Queensland.
Prime Minister will pause. The member for Moncrieff will take her point of order.
On relevance, Mr Speaker, we were talking about the UK nuclear program, not the New South Wales.
Resume your seat. It's the member is entitled to state a point of order on relevance, but the Prime Minister is being directly relevant. He has the call.
I hate to state the obvious, but they've just said that David Crisafulli, Peter Walsh, John Pizzitto, Mark Speakman, Shane Love and Guy Barnett are all irrelevant. Well, they are as far as their plan is concerned, because their plan is friendless amongst their own people, amongst the business community and amongst anyone in the energy sector.
Call to the honourable member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How will Australian manufacturing workers help to deliver a future made in Australia? And how is the Albanese Labor government backing these workers? What views has the government rejected?
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for Cunningham not just for the question, but for being a champion of Australian manufacturing. We know that Australians want their country to be a place that makes things. Strong economies have strong manufacturing capabilities, and our Future Made in Australia plan is about being able to mobilise Australian manufacturers to make the things that will reduce emissions and generate strong jobs along the way. From new generation solar panels that could be made in the Hunter, electrolyser manufacturing in Gladstone, through to the making and recycling of batteries in outer suburban Melbourne. But if you want to regenerate and revitalise manufacturing, you need a committed government that will work with industry and back manufacturing workers. That's why we've set up the National Reconstruction Fund, the Industry Growth Program, and pushing for a future made in Australia. But we're also backing manufacturing workers because from 1 July they will be getting a cost of living tax cut. Every manufacturing worker, we want them to earn more and keep more of what they are earning. And from 1 July, a manufacturing worker on $63,000 will be $1,357 better off. And we're also backing manufacturing by investing in our industrial heartlands. I visited the Illawarra last week with the member for Cunningham, where there's excitement about offshore wind development, where renewable projects will generate thousands of blue-collar jobs and will generate cheaper energy for other manufacturers to do their work.
Treasurer will cease rejecting.
Renewable energy projects delivering cheaper energy, more jobs, and that is how you deliver cost of living relief, not by pushing up power prices with the most expensive form of energy going. And every time we have sought to back Australian manufacturing, the Liberals and Nationals have opposed it. When we wanted to set up the National Reconstruction Fund, the Liberals and Nationals opposed it. When we wanted to deliver energy price relief for manufacturers, the Liberals and Nationals opposed it. And when we wanted to deliver tax cuts for manufacturing workers, the Liberals and Nationals wanted an early election to stop them. And of course, this is the mob that saw off car manufacturing in this country and to this day say it was absolutely the right thing to do. That's what they say. This government believes manufacturing can deliver a future made in Australia. That side only talks about manufacturing to talk it down.
Give a call to the honourable member for Flynn.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Former Australian Workers' Union Secretary Dan Walton said, and I quote, "If Australia wants to accelerate along the path to becoming a zero-carbon economy, it is a golden opportunity to create the capacity to build small modular reactors capable of powering energy-hungry manufacturing. Does the Prime Minister support the union movement's call to lift the nuclear energy moratorium?"
Order. Members on my left and right will see. The member for Barker and the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme will cease ejecting. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question about a business leader who he says speaks on behalf of the entire trade union movement. I'll give you the big tip here. The union movement campaign will be very strong against your nuclear power plant. Because what they know is that your plan will destroy jobs. Your plan will lead to higher power prices. Your plan will undermine manufacturing in this country because you do not have a plan for anything in between now and 2040s. And what we have is a shortage right now. Eight power stations had shut down by the time we came to office. Redbank, Wallerawang, Anglesea, Northern Power, Playford, Morwell, Hazelwood, Muja A and B, all on your watch. 24 separate announcements of power station closures on their watch. And what they used to do was respond to that by handing around across their front bench a lump of coal and think that that was funny. Well, I'll give you another big tip. Don't try that with uranium. Because what you did was make a joke of it. You pretended that coal was the future for 10 years. While you did nothing. Well, power stations closed and energy supply went backwards. You refused to support alternative plans. You spoke about a gas-led recovery and then nothing happened. You now say you're going to have a nuclear recovery. This is the same mob that replaced fibre in the NBN with copper.
Prime Minister will pause. The member for Moncrieff on a point of order.
The Prime Minister should direct his comments through the chair.
Prime Minister, in continuation. I remind all members about using the standing orders.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The most significant point they've made today. Mr Speaker, here's what Andrew McKellar said of ACCI when we're quoting business leaders such as Mr Walton. Here's what Andrew McKellar said, not a Labor branch member as far as I'm aware. Past failure has crimped certainty for industry and investors and left our energy sector in disarray. Australian businesses and households are now paying the price. And indeed they are, Mr Speaker, as a result of the failure by those opposite to set Australia up for the present, let alone plan for the future. That is what we inherited. That is the problems that we are solving, and that's why we have a positive plan going forward and why they have no detail of how many reactors, about how much the cost will be. They just have rhetoric, which is all about delaying the investment that we need.
Prime Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Skills and Training. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to remove financial barriers so more Australians can skill up and work in key sectors like renewable energy? How does this compare to alternative policy settings to skill our future energy workforce?
Give the call to the Minister for Skills and Training.
Well, thanks very much, Speaker. Can I thank the member for Lingiari for her question and her strong advocacy for closing the gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians in the skills area in her electorate across this country. Speaker, when we came to government, we inherited the greatest skills shortage in 50 years. We also found ourselves inheriting a vocational education and training sector that was depleted and directionless, a complete absence of national leadership. There were no agreements reached on investment or directional reform of the vet sector with any state or territory government, not one. And, for example, there was little or no attention paid to the transition of the energy sector, an imperative to successfully decarbonise the economy and shift to renewables, the cheapest energy source available. Upon election, we started work to make up lost time. We convened the Jobs and Skills Summit, bringing constituent parts of the economy together. We established Jobs and Skills Australia to provide strategic advice in educating and training and providing the skills to a fast-changing economy.
And indeed, last year, 355,000 Australians enrolled in fee-free TAFE in areas of demand, including in the energy sector, with a further 320,000 courses available from this year. Speaker, we struck a national skills agreement with every state and territory, the first of its kind in more than a decade, $30 billion of certainty of funding over 5 years to make sure that we supply the skills that are needed. And of course, we provide $10,000 in financial support to clean energy apprentices. Those apprentices, of course, will be getting a tax cut next Monday, as are 13.6 million taxpayers in this country, which as a result of this government. And indeed, the Energy Minister and I announced further investment in clean energy sector to increase teachers and trainers to supply the skills that are needed for this sector. 10 days ago, I was in Western Australia and I was announcing a centre of excellence between a university and TAFE and industry in the clean energy sector. This is a plan for clean energy. This is something that is devoid, which the opposition's plan is devoid of. There is no reference to a nuclear energy industry workforce plan in anything that's been uttered by the Leader of the Opposition in terms of their claims. The reality is, Speaker, they do not have any details. They do not have any plans to supply the skills in this area, and the main reason they don't have any plans is because in their heart of hearts they know that this plan, this so-called plan, doesn't have any chance of happening.
The call to the honourable member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Round 1 of the $300 million Growing Regions Fund was underspent by $93 million, despite receiving 311 suitable applications, representing $1.4 billion in worthy projects. Why did the minister select just 40 of the 311 suitable applications? And will the minister carry over the unspent funds to round 2? And if not, why not?
The call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, and can I thank the member for Mayo for her project and for her question, and can I assure the member that the 40 community infrastructure projects across regional Australia that were funded out of the Growing Regions program, including projects like the Seymour Community Wellbeing Hub in the member for Nichols seat, the Mission Beach Town Upgrade, great project, the Kununurra Runway Extension and the Swan Hill Reinvigorating Our Riverfront project, were all selected on merit, and they were part of a transparent project process that was designed to enhance integrity and transparency of grants and to clean up the mess and rorts of those opposite. Now, as you know, the process involved a multi-party parliamentary panel, of which the member for Indi was a member, as part of the crossbench, so I'm very grateful for her work in doing that. But of course, not all eligible projects were recommended for funding by my department. If you are suggesting that I should have funded not recommended projects, then I'd suggest that that is not in the spirit of integrity or transparency. I look forward to opening round 2 of the Growing Regions program shortly. There will be some changes to the guidelines following the very helpful feedback from the Audit Office and the multi-party panel. It is my intention that this round will include the unallocated funding from round 1, making even more money available for important community infrastructure projects across regional Australia.
The call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government's Homes for Australia plan delivering cost of living relief? And what risky alternatives could threaten this support?
The call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I do want to thank our terrific member for Boothby. It was great to join her in Adelaide last week, indeed in Tonsley, where we announced 350 new and improved homes for more than 600 South Australians, Mr Speaker. That announcement, of course, came one day after we announced more than 100 new homes in Melbourne in the member for Jagga-Jagga's electorate. Both of these projects and announcements came from our Social Housing Accelerator, the $2 billion Social Housing Accelerator, and it is, of course, just one part of our $32 billion Homes for Australia plan. Mr Speaker, our plan, of course, will help deliver more homes more quickly in more parts of Australia. We know that Australia doesn't have enough homes, and we haven't had enough homes for a long time. That is why we need our Homes for Australia $32 billion plan. Our plan includes, of course, the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund, the single biggest investment in social and affordable housing in more than a decade. And the fund is also helping to deliver Veterans' Acute Housing Program, with applications now open, as my colleague, the Minister for Veterans Affairs, also announced last week in Adelaide. We are working hard to tackle the challenges of housing in this country and the challenges that we inherited from those opposite, Mr Speaker. We know that you deliver real cost of living relief, not by pushing up energy prices with nuclear reactors, but by working every day for the people of Australia to deliver more homes. Mr Speaker, I remind those opposite that, of course, the Housing Australia Future Fund was delayed for 6 months, thanks to those opposite and when they paired up with the Greens, Mr Speaker. They voted against it in this place, and the first tender round of the Housing Australia Future Fund closed recently, and it received hundreds of applications for tens of thousands of new homes, Mr Speaker. And we'll be announcing the successful tenders in coming months. And I remind those opposite that when these announcements come, they voted against this Housing Australia Future Fund, Mr Speaker. All they have on their side is their reheated thought bubble for housing, their super for housing, which we know will push up prices, wreck people's super and doesn't build a single home. Mr Speaker, it seems those opposite are happy to put billions of dollars on the table for nuclear reactors, but not one single dollar for one new home.
The Minister will pause. I just reminded the member for Deakin he's on a warning, and he continues to interject. So he'll leave the chamber under 94A. Try and help me help you. Okay, the Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's a shame that the member for Deakin is leaving because, of course, he was responsible for those challenges in housing that we inherited, and, of course, they've got no policies other than their super for housing, the reheated bubble, as I said before, not one new dollar for one new home. Their plan will push up housing prices while we're getting on with delivering new homes for Australians that need them. We want to see more help for home buyers, we want to see more help for renters, and we want more help for Australians that need a safe place to stay each night.
Call to the honourable member for Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Opal Nuclear Research Reactor in my electorate of Hughes helps create life-saving nuclear medicine, supporting 500,000 medical procedures a year to treat conditions including breast cancer and lymphoma. When will the government tell the Australian people where the waste from this facility will ultimately be stored?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Apparently, I thank the member for Hughes for her question, and to be fair to the member for Hughes, she hasn't been here for the entire time in which this has been a debate and has not been landed by this parliament. What this does is point towards the difficulty when it comes to a small amount of medical-based waste, a small amount, a tiny amount, compared with the extraordinary amounts of waste that are created by a major nuclear reactor, let alone 7 of them. And I note the Leader of the Opposition spoke about real estate values in Lucas Heights. Well, I say to the member for Hughes, when you do a direct mail, do one to Lucas Heights, because it will be really easy to do one to Lucas Heights, because there are 0 addresses with Lucas Heights as a residential address. 0. So the Leader of the Opposition said in a moment of truth, he said that real estate values hadn't gone down because it was close to there. He's right, because there are 0 addresses.
Order. Members on
now,
my left.
The medical reactor there plays an important role, just as people getting an X-ray, people engaged in that sort of activity. It's important for health care. We don't come at this ideologically. What we say is the economics should drive what happens with energy in this country. And the economics tell you that the cheapest form of new energy is renewables. And they also tell you that the most expensive form of new energy is nuclear reactors.
Order. Give the call to the member for Hasluck.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government helping Australians with cost of living, and what is standing in the way?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Hasluck for her question. Indeed, taking action on cost of living is my government's #1 priority. And in less than a week now, next Monday, the government will deliver more relief for Australians. A tax cut for every taxpayer, all 13.6 million of them. And of course, at the same time, a pay rise for 2.6 million workers on award wages, because we want Australians to earn more and to keep more of what they earn. $300 in power bill relief for every household, and $325 for every small business. Continuing the freeze on the cost of PBS medicines, and of course 2 weeks of additional government-funded paid parental leave. This isn't the beginning of our cost of living help, and it's certainly not the end. But what we have managed to do is to provide that cost of living relief while halving inflation. So instead of having a 6 in front of it, it has a 3 in front of it. And yesterday, we announced new rules to make sure that families are getting better prices at the supermarket. We're making sure that families and farmers get a fair go. I noticed that the leader of the National Party was still out there calling for...
The member for Cowper. Cease objecting.
Calling for the compulsory breakup of supermarkets. I'm not sure who he thinks would buy the Coles shop at supermarket at Warwick, but I suspect that it might be Woolworths. I suspect that it might lead to more concentration, not less. But to be fair to the National Party, their newfound over-embracement of socialism is there for all to see. But while we're fighting to bring costs down, they have a tax policy designed to roll back tax cuts. They have an IR policy to deliver lower wages. They have a fiscal strategy designed to rack up debt. They have a housing policy designed to wreck super. They have a health policy designed to destroy Medicare. And they have a nuclear reactor plan designed to jack up power prices. A nuclear plan that costs too much and takes too long. And a plan to stop the rollout of cheap renewables and put an end to the certainty that business, industry and families need.
Give the call to the honourable member for Indi.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Last week, Richard Boyle lost his appeal to seek immunity under the Public Interest Disclosure Act, despite the judge acknowledging that Mr Boyle is a whistleblower. Last election, you promised to fix whistleblower protection laws, but 2 years on, we have not seen a draft bill. Why is the government dragging its feet on whistleblower reform?
Give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I do thank the member for Indi for her question. The government is committed to strong, effective and accessible protections for whistleblowers, and in June last year the government passed priority amendments to the Public Interest Disclosure Act which ensured immediate improvements to the public sector whistleblower protection scheme were in place before the commencement of the National Anti-Corruption Commission on the 1st of July last year. The reforms implemented 21 of the 33 recommendations from the 2016 review of the Public Interest Disclosure Act 2013 that was conducted by the eminent former public servant Mr Philip Moss. And I'd note just in passing that those opposite while in government did nothing about that 2016 review of the Public Interest Disclosure Act. The reforms that we passed last year in June were the first significant public sector whistleblower reform since the Public Interest Disclosure Act was first enacted in 2013 by the Labor government then in power. We are now progressing a second broader stage of reforms, which includes the release of a consultation paper and public consultation on additional supports for public sector whistleblowers, which might include a whistleblower protection authority. And submissions received as part of that consultation process are now being used to inform the government's next steps for reform. I will not be commenting on matters that remain before Australian courts.
Call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How is the Albanese Labor government working to help regional Australians and deliver cost of living relief? What approaches have been rejected?
Give a call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Can I say thanks very much to the member for Hunter for the question. He's an incredibly strong advocate for his community, and one of the things that we all love about the member for Hunter is just that he'll give absolutely everything a go, although I was a little worried about his last week testing the zip line at the Lake Mac climbing tower, but well done, mate. That was quite an effort. As members from regional Australia, we do understand that people in our communities are under pressure, and we do know that some of them are doing it really tough. It's why our number one priority is every single day addressing cost of living relief for every Australian. We're working hard to deliver that cost of living relief to ensure that Australians, particularly those in our regions, earn more and get to keep more of what they earn. It is 6 days until the 1st of July, and that means it is 6 days until every Australian taxpayer will be getting a tax cut. It's 6 days until our $300 energy bill relief begins, and it's 6 days until 2.6 million low-paid workers get their third consecutive pay rise backed in by this government. At the same time, we are strengthening Medicare and we're delivering cheaper medicines to every community from the cities to the regions. We're delivering HECS relief for everyone with student debt. And from the university student in Broome to the supermarket worker in Broken Hill, to the nurse in Katherine, to the teacher in Kincumber, to the cafe owner in Cairns, to the parents in Ceduna buying medicines for their kids. We are building more homes more quickly, helping put downward pressure on rents in our regions. And we're strengthening the food and grocery code to get a better deal for the farmers and cheaper groceries for Australians. And we're backing regional jobs by incentivising and investing in developing low-carbon liquid fuels under our Future Made in Australia plan. And when it comes to infrastructure and regional investment, we've increased funding across the country, in particular increasing Roads to Recovery funding from $500 million to $1 billion. And that means every single council across Australia will have more money to spend on local roads, reducing pressure on ratepayers across all of those local council areas, because otherwise they would have to pay for them. In 2 years, this government, a Labor government, has delivered historic increases to local road funding that the coalition was never able to do. We know there's much more to do. We know that's why we are working every single day for Australians to make cost of living better. And that is how you deliver cost of living relief, not by pushing up power prices with nuclear reactors all across regional Australia.
For the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask further questions placed on the notice paper.